Our new Prime Minister, Theresa May, strikes again, this time at the heart of the BBC. The chair of the corporation said tonight she was standing down amid reports of a direct intervention from Number 10. A reasonable move or a case of unwarranted interference? Either way, it has certainly been a tricky few days for the BBC, so what is going on? Meanwhile, at Westminster, Theresa May has troubles closer to home. The boundary review suggests changes that overwhelmingly benefit her party, but will she get her own MPs to vote for them? Also on News at 10 tonight. She battled Ebola and now she's fighting for her reputation. Today, one key charge against nurse Pauline Kafaki was dramatically dropped. A long-lost ship is found in near-perfect condition in the Arctic, but it only serves to deepen the mystery surrounding the fate of its crew. And the fantastic Mr. Dahl, 100 years on from his birth, why Roald Dahl is bigger than ever.
This is ITV News at 10 with Tom Bradby.
Good evening. It hasn't been the easiest few days for the BBC, but all the same, the news that its chair, Rona Fairhead, was stepping down came as something of a surprise tonight, especially given the fact that she'd only just been reappointed by David Cameron. There are reports that Miss Fairhead was forced out by the Prime Minister, Theresa May. If so, are we just witnessing a cull of anyone who was ever on civil terms with Mr Cameron, or is there more to it than that? And more importantly, should a new Prime Minister really be intervening in this way?
Turmoil at the top. The BBC is looking for a new chair tonight after its current boss appears to have fallen out with the Prime Minister. Rona Fairhead was appointed by David Cameron, but in yet another sign that she's asserting her authority, Theresa May demanded the BBC chair should reapply for her job. She declined. In a statement tonight, she strongly encouraged me to take part in the new appointment process for what would be a new 4-year term as BBC chairman. However, after much thought, I have come to the conclusion that I should not do so. In reply, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport said the government thanks Rona Fairhead for her service to the BBC. Full details of the BBC Charter will be announced shortly. Hardly very warm words and an indication that Theresa May is in no way sorry to see her go. Certainly Rona Fairhead was a staunch defender of the corporation, warning last year about the dangers of political interference.
I think that any risk of any perception that there is governmental interference or political interference has the risk of having a chilling effect on the organisation and preventing it doing one of its core duties.
But standing up for the corporation is something that after just 2 years in the job, she will now no longer be able to do.
And Libby is here. Late breaking story tonight, really, this, Libby. But you've been speaking to people at Westminster. What's the general reaction?
Well, I think the first thing to say, Tom, is that Theresa May was perfectly entitled to ask Rona Fairhead to reapply for her job, and that job was changing. She was chair of the BBC Trust, which is largely a supervisory role. It was becoming the chairman of a board, effectively running the BBC. And what I understand from government sources is that Mrs May wanted to see someone in there who could take charge, and effectively she wanted to run a competition so that Rona Fairhead applied, but there were other people who were going to apply, and she felt she was well within her rights to do that. In fact, there's some suggestion that she actually thought that David Cameron was being a bit lazy, actually just keeping Rona Fairhead in the job in the transition period. I think people close to David Cameron would suggest it was rather sensible to have some sort of continuity. Nevertheless, I think people overall are pretty surprised that it's happened so quickly, and I understand that it was due to be announced on Thursday. In fact, clearly there was so little love lost between Rona Fairhead and the Prime Minister, she decided to go tonight. OK, Libby, thank you very much indeed. How about one of those quirks of coincidence, or not, depending on your point of view? The announcement of Rona Fairhead's resignation followed hot on the heels of the departure of the Great British Bake Off to Channel 4. But the two hosts, Sue Perkins and Mel Giedroyc, announced they would not be going with it. They said they loved being part of the show and seeing it rise like a pair of yeasted Latvian baps, as they put it, but were not going with the dough. The question then, perhaps, does its move represent a good deal for Channel 4 or a rash gamble?
Bakers, it's bread week.
With their cooking innuendo,
Dough prodded by Paul Hollywood's digits of doom.
comic pair Mel and Sue have been among the key ingredients of this remarkably successful show.
And whose bread week
You're not alone.
will be their last.
But they won't be following the Bake Off to Channel 4. In a statement typical of their tongue-in-cheek style, the duo said, "The BBC nurtured the show from its infancy and helped give it its distinctive warmth and charm. We've loved seeing it rise and rise like a pair of yeasted Latvian baps. We're not going with the dough."
I think it says that Mel and Sue liked working for the BBC, or liked it being on the BBC, and they might also think that, you know, that its days are numbered.
What you do with the cron, you twist it and then join it.
Love Productions says it wasn't about the money, but the BBC would disagree. Under pressure from the government over its charter renewal, it couldn't justify the extra costs. It's thought the BBC offered around £15 million a year for the programme. That's double what it already pays for the show and its spin-offs. It's believed Love Productions wouldn't take anything less than £25 million a year.
Is it helping that we're all...
Channel 4 is in the middle of its own battle with the government over privatisation. Some would argue outbidding a public broadcaster undermines its case to retain its own unique model. And tonight, it's still not clear whether Paul Hollywood and Mary Berry will sign up, leaving the broadcaster with a big challenge of how to come up with another recipe for success. Nazanin Mashiri, News at 10.
Now, there are those that say that so long as Jeremy Corbyn remains leader, Labour isn't very likely to win the next election, and maybe not the one after that either. True or not, things certainly won't be made any easier under new plans to update the boundaries of constituencies in England and Wales. They are meant to standardise, as far as possible, the size of those constituencies which have, the plan's architects say, favoured Labour for the past few years. As it happens, Mr Corbyn is one of the 50 MPs or so from all parties who could lose their seats.
The 650 ladies and gentlemen who make up the House of Commons between them represent the 64 million people who live in the UK. But if you want fewer politicians, they have to have bigger constituencies with more voters. And that is what today's changes are all about. Take the famous steelworks at Port Talbot in Wales, currently in the same Aberavon constituency as the town, but not under today's plans. There would be an MP on one side of this river and a different MP on the other, splitting the high street from the town's shopping centre.
I don't think splitting things up makes things better.
We wouldn't have anybody directly to go to, yes.
Does that worry you?
Yes, it does, yes.
But the bigger picture is how all these new lines on a map could affect the outcome of the next election, because more Labour seats are disappearing than Conservative ones.
Well, I think it's pretty clear that this is all about a Conservative Party advantage. The situation is being gerrymandered to help the Conservative Party. And I think that's an appalling situation, and it's terrible for democracy in our country.
Overall, the number of Westminster MPs will fall from 650 to 600, with new constituencies drawn up to contain an average of 75,000 voters. Politicians whose constituencies are at risk include former Chancellor George Osborne, his Tatton seat could disappear, Brexit Secretary David Davis, who's facing changes in Houghton, Price and Howden, and even Labour leader Jeremy Corbyn. His seat in North London is being merged with the one next door.
Currently, we have seats which are 3 times the size of another, which means that one elector's vote is worth 3 times that of another. That's simply not fair, which is why we're determined to ensure that we have equal-sized constituencies.
So why do these equal-sized constituencies favour the Tories? In its most basic form, Labour towns like Pontypridd in Wales now have fewer voters, so these areas will have fewer MPs, while suburbs in the southeast, this is Horsham, have more voters, so this constituency hasn't been cut.
Population movement tends to be out of Labour favouring city and urban areas, more to the countryside and to suburban areas where the Conservatives dominate. And therefore, almost whenever these boundary reviews take place, and we've had half a dozen over the years since the Second World War, it favours the Conservative Party.
So expect an almighty row, and not just from Labour.
And Chris is still in Westminster tonight, where he lives. Not quite, but nearly. Chris, is Theresa May going to get these through? I mean, obviously it benefits the Tory party, but individual MPs could lose out. So will she get it through, the Commons itself?
Well, Tom, what I will say is this. Labour MPs have got a lot more to cry about for reasons that we've just been explaining. But this is not a pain-free process for many Conservative MPs as well. And as I think Theresa May is probably learning quite fast on the job at the moment, she has a very small majority in that place behind me. So it would only take around a dozen Tory MPs, those who like their constituency boundary and don't want it changed, or those who aren't happy with their consolation prize of going up to the House of Lords for standing aside, and they could block this thing in its tracks. The thing is, Tom, if you're changing all these boundaries to have roughly 75,000 voters in each one, and you're cutting the number of MPs in that place to 600, it's going to be a painful process, particularly for Labour, but also for the Tories.
OK, but talking about Labour, it's often been said that Jeremy Corbyn supporters might use this to purge the party of, MPs that don't get on with him. True or false, do you think?
Well, at the moment, false, because Labour's rules at the moment say that those MPs who are facing their constituency disappearing have a good chance of reapplying. However, should Jeremy Corbyn win, and don't forget the re-election, or if he does get re-elected, is at the end of next week, he might decide to change those rules. The left of the Labour Party might look at it and say, actually, we want to have new people in. And it's at that point, I think, that those who've been most critical of Jeremy Corbyn might start looking over their shoulder.
OK, Chris, thank you very much indeed for now. And you can use your postcode to see how the boundary changes affect you. Full details are on our website, itv.com/news. When Pauline Cafferty, the nurse who was hospitalised 3 times by Ebola, went up before a disciplinary hearing this morning, the accusation against her was that she had dishonestly tried to hide her infection when she flew home from Sierra Leone. But then things changed this afternoon. The dishonesty charge was dropped. The Nursing Council accepted the disease itself may have affected her judgment. And anyway, the screening process at Heathrow was chaotic.
Pauline Cafferty survived Ebola. Now she faces charges of misconduct by the Nursing and Midwifery Council. She left this first day of the hearing still on the nursing register and still smiling. Miss Cafferty had volunteered in the heart of an unprecedented Ebola outbreak, but the case against her now focuses on what happened when she returned to Britain. The NMC is examining claims Miss Cafferty allowed an incorrect temperature to be taken when coming through Heathrow Airport. Today's hearing was told a doctor took Miss Cafferty's temperature, first measuring 38.2 degrees, then 38.3, but it was recorded on the port of entry form as 37.2 degrees, below the danger mark of 37.5, where further assessment is needed. She admits she then took paracetamol, but when she was later examined by another doctor, it's alleged she failed to tell them she'd taken anything that could lower her temperature. Miss Cafferty then gave a lower reading of 37.5 degrees and was cleared for onward travel. It was just hours later that she was diagnosed with one of the most severe viral loads of Ebola ever recorded. Speaking to Julie Etchingham, Pauline described what happened next.
The first or second day, my mouth was very painful. Then as time went on, I had a horrendous rash. I was in a lot of pain, and then my body became swollen. I think probably my organs were starting to fail at that point. The clinical lead down in the Royal Free, he told me, we're going to put you out as critical now. I don't remember much after that.
But today the NMC charged Miss Cafferty on 3 counts of concealing her temperature and risking the spread of the virus. The most serious allegation that could have been levelled at Pauline Cafferty is that she was dishonest, that she had deliberately misled Public Health England and put the public at risk. But that allegation was today thrown out. The NMC conceded in the hearing that her behaviour at the time could have just been down to bad judgment because she was delirious with the onset of Ebola. In the 2 years since Pauline Cafferty volunteered to save lives, she's had to fight for her own. Now she must fight for her reputation in the job for which she has risked so much. Peter Smith, News at 10, Edinburgh.
Hopes were never high for the ceasefire that came into force yesterday evening in Syria, and indeed in places shellfire has continued, but mostly it is holding. For many of those who've been living under siege, the prospect of food convoys is welcome, but all they can think about is freedom.
No one knows how long it will last, but this ceasefire has transformed eastern Aleppo. On these streets where so many children have died, suddenly they can play. The sound of explosions and suffering, replaced, however briefly, by laughter. The man who sent News at 10 so many graphic images of Aleppo's ordeal, clearly moved by the very different scenes he was able to film today.
To see children playing outside, they can go outside and they can play without looking at the sky every now and then. They were so happy. I can see hope in their eyes.
After the shooting stops, the next stage is delivering desperately needed aid. Russian troops have already started bringing in supplies to the west of Aleppo, but then it is controlled by Russia's allies, the Assad regime. This convoy of 20 aid trucks setting off from Turkey bound for the rebel east of Aleppo can expect a much harder journey and will have to travel roads where armed groups are still active.
The situation is calmer today, but the access routes into Aleppo are still insecure. There are still fighters along those roads, and that no agreement has been reached to allow aid to get in as of today.
It's not just the children who've been taking advantage of the ceasefire. On the streets of Aleppo, there have been protests, with people who've been living under siege telling the outside world that a few days' respite, even some aid, will not change the fact that they're being slaughtered by their own government. In this hospital in the Douma district of Damascus lie some of the survivors of the last bombing yesterday, just hours before the ceasefire took effect. 13 people died, many more were injured. In Douma today, just like Aleppo, normal life and laughter return for a while. Something to grab hold of and enjoy when you don't know how long it will last. Paul Davis, News at 10.
Now, with Hillary Clinton forced on doctors' orders to avoid campaigning and time running out, it fell to President Obama today to take the fight to Donald Trump. For Mr. Trump himself, it was business as usual at a rally in Iowa tonight. Mrs. Clinton says she'll be back in action by Thursday, and she admitted she thought she could power through the illness when she should have been resting.
He's already won 2 presidential elections, so with Hillary off the campaign trail, it fell to the man with the job to argue why she is the woman to replace him.
You want to debate who's more fit to be our president? One candidate who's traveled to more countries than any Secretary of State ever has more qualifications than pretty much anyone who's ever run for this job, and the other who isn't fit in any way, shape, or form to represent this country abroad and be its commander-in-chief.
After this weekend's events, fitness to serve is currently at the heart of this campaign. And Hillary Clinton has been calling the TV networks to insist that all really is well.
I'm feeling so much better, and obviously I should have gotten some rest sooner. I probably would have been better off if I'd just pulled down my schedule on Friday, but like a lot of people, I just thought I could keep going forward and power through it, and obviously that didn't work out so well.
If anybody's concerned, you should be the one.
Yeah.
You know, if anybody...
Cue Team Clinton, deploying everyone at their disposal.
Today she made a decision, which I think was correct, to cancel her campaign day.
Right.
To take one more day to rest, but she looked like $1 million this morning. I can tell she's feeling a lot better.
She has pneumonia.
Yeah.
Sometimes that can take a while, the recovery.
It can.
Is it possible that she will be away for weeks from the campaign trail?
No, not a shot. I'll be lucky to hold her back another day.
The message is going down well with many of her supporters.
This whole event, this whole scenario speaks to her grit and her commitment to the cause, and the fact that she was willing to put her health to the side in order to address the needs of the American people.
I don't think it will make a big difference. It might make a tiny difference for a small number of people.
But this is why she will feel the need to be back. Donald Trump isn't mentioning health, but he is fighting for the undecideds.
Well, my opponent slanders you as deplorable and irredeemable. I call you hard-working American patriots.
It doesn't take a political strategist to know that being off the trail now leaves a vacuum which others will be keen to fill.
And Emma joins us from Washington. Emma, I think for a lot of people this side of the Atlantic, the idea that a woman being ill for a few days should be such a big deal seems a little odd. Is it really going to affect her campaign?
People here are quite accepting, obviously, that candidates will get ill. It's a really gruelling schedule. But they are extremely concerned about the fact there was no disclosure. Nobody said when she actually was diagnosed with pneumonia that she wasn't well. They just carried on and probably would have done had it not all gone wrong when that video surfaced as she left the 9/11 memorial. Now, I think what's absolutely critical in the days ahead is how she holds up. When she gets back on the road on Thursday, will she be able to keep up the pace? Is that health going to hold? That's the real issue. Also, we have to continue to question this integrity issue that others are really raising now. Why was it that when Hillary Clinton in the past has felt under threat, she absolutely closed down and didn't give out any information? And they feel that that's what she's doing again. And that's what makes people start to question whether or not they are being completely fairly treated. The thing is, so many people here are completely undecided, and the next few weeks will be crucial. First early voting starts in 11 days' time.
OK, Emma, thank you very much indeed. It is getting hard to keep track of how many medals Paralympics GB has won in Rio. 31 golds at the last count. 3 of those happened overnight in the pool in what can really only be described as a fantastic 40 minutes.
The beauty of sport is often the unexpected. A trio of swimmers surpassing even the lofty standards of so many fellow British Paralympians.
Oh, fantastic.
As so often over the last 3 games, Ellie Simmonds was central, a champion once again, who together with Susie Rogers and Sasha Kindred bagged 3 golds and 2 world records in less than 40 minutes.
The Brazilian Tollison Glock walked out in front of me and the crowd erupted, and it gave me a spur to think, OK, this crowd's for me. I got to perform. I did my job. Ellie Simmonds came out, did her job. Susie Rogers came out, did her job. 3 gold medals in 40 minutes. Special night, and I'm proud to be part of that.
It was Rogers' first victory at the age of 33. Simmonds' 5th, despite only being 21. Their careers have had near opposite trajectories.
Ellie Simmonds on her way to gold.
But last night they combined in a magical hour. Their families were both poolside, Kindred's were not, but his young daughter did get to see it thanks to his wife's rather passionate support.
She was screaming at the TV and Ella was asleep next to her. It was 11:30, it was a school night. But because she was screaming, it woke Ella up and she managed to see the last 25 metres of my race. So she knew what her daddy had done, and she's had a very special day at school today.
On seeing her parents post-race, for a second Ellie Simmonds considered jumping up alongside them. Perhaps given her other events still to come, she thought better of it. The emotions, though, impossible to control. Richard Pallo, News at 10, Rio de Janeiro.
And Ellie Simmonds managed another medal this evening, a bronze, this time in the 400 metres freestyle, the event she first won in Beijing as a 13-year-old. Finding the wreck of a long-lost ship can, of course, offer insights into how those on board lived and all too often died. But a discovery in Arctic waters appears to have solved one mystery whilst creating another. Divers think they have located the long-lost HMS Terror, which got trapped in ice in 1848. It doesn't look like one of Arctic history's most exciting discoveries, but move a bit closer and this seabed thousands of miles away does yield a rather fascinating secret. It's in the form of this ship, just 20 metres down, which by the standards of wrecks is in quite remarkable condition. This is a bell, this the hatch down to a mess hall, this the small funnel for a steam engine, and this the ship's wheel. But what's interesting is that all these mark this vessel out as HMS Terror, and the point is, it shouldn't be here. The story of the Terror belongs to a completely different world. It set off with the great British polar explorer Sir John Franklin to try to complete the Northwest Passage. It disappeared and the Navy spent 11 years looking for its crew. HMS Terror set off from Greenhithe in May 1845 and it was last seen entering Baffin Bay in August that year. It's not known what happened, but historians believe the ship was abandoned in heavy sea ice off the coast of King William Island. It was discovered again now, though, in Terror Bay, 60 miles south of where it is thought to have been left. So, what happened?
The story used to be that they abandoned ship and marched off to their deaths. It looks like this ship may have been reboarded by members of the crew and they sailed into Terror Bay, already named after the ship, and the ship sank there. But we still don't know why they ran out of food, what happened to the expedition, and we don't know what they did with the scientific data they gathered. But this ship just may help us to get further into what is the greatest mystery in the history of the Arctic.
In short, a wreck discovered by chance that might finally yield an answer to a very old mystery. A few lines now of Roald Dahl to take us towards the end of our programme. So please, oh please, we beg, we pray, go throw your TV set away, and in its place you can install a lovely bookshelf on the wall. Advice we hope, obviously, you won't follow, at least for the next couple of minutes, as we take a look at how the world has been celebrating the 100th anniversary of the great man's birthday and the legacy his work has left to generations of children.
I catch dreams.
The BFG may have caught them, but Roald Dahl wrote them.
I, Willy Wonka, have decided to allow 5 children to visit my factory.
He got Charlie into the chocolate factory and gave all of us a golden ticket into imagination. A century after his birth, Roald Dahl's legacy is being celebrated far and wide. His most important readers dressing up as his characters.
I like Roald Dahl so much because, well, he's probably the best children's author ever, and I've read all of his books.
I'm Ellie and I'm dressed up as Sophie from the BFG.
His stories were born in the seclusion of his writing hut.
In this little place, it takes a little while to get in and out of, but once you're in, you're there, and it's lovely. It is my little nest, my womb.
He always said great writers, artists, creative people aren't really recognized until they die. And I think that has happened to Roald. I think his legacy is now enormous.
More than 200 million copies of his books have been sold worldwide.
There is no life I know to compare with pure imagination.
Films and plays abound in the multi-million-pound Dahl phenomenon. At this museum in the Buckinghamshire village where the fighter pilot lived and wrote, the latest fans of his imaginary world.
The way that Roald Dahl writes is exactly how children develop language. So they exaggerate, they use hyperbole in it, and strong contrasts, and that's all there in his books. So he's writing in a way that children pick up language themselves. He said that he felt that kindness was his #1 attribute that he looked for in another person. And after his death, a charity was set up now called the Roald Dahl Marvellous Children's Charity, and they exist to support children with severe and long-term conditions.
Mr. Twit sneaked out into the garden and dug up some worms.
Luke Ellison was here today, revelling in the twits.
He just make them really funny, makes you want to keep reading, and just makes them really exciting.
Use human being, and human being is like straw bunkles and cream to those giants out there.
Thankfully, Roald Dahl ignored the BFG's advice that you don't gobblefunk around with words. Neil Connery, News at 10.
We were promised hot temperatures in parts of the country today, and boy, was it hot. It turned out to be warmer even than the forecasts. In Gravesend, it reached 34.4 degrees Celsius, making today the hottest September day since 1911 and the hottest day of 2016. All rather different in Manchester, though, where tonight's Champions League football between Man City and Borussia Mönchengladbach was called off because of the rain. And Celtic fans will wish their game had been called off too. They ended up losing 7-0 away to Barcelona. This tap-in from Luis Suarez was the final nail in the coffin. That's it. I'll be here again tomorrow. I hope you can join me for now. Good night, and thanks very much for watching.